Let's talk about regulation versus self-regulation.
Yeah, yeah.
So it seems like Mark Zuckerberg is already making moves before any regulations hit the books.
Yeah.
Is that going to be enough, or should we look toward the European model, which in May 25th of this year, there will be new regulations that will come into effect, will restrict the type of personal data tech companies can collect, store, and use across the EU. And of course, one of the rules that will be enshrined is the right to be forgotten.
Yeah.
Is that an approach that the U.S. needs to be looking at this point?
I think so. I think a few interesting things there. First of all, this right to be forgotten. Europe is giving people the right to just have their entire data trail, the cookies, that follow you around, to have that be erased and permanently forgotten. And 2 million people have actually already opted into that. So this is not a small thing. I see a couple of things happening on the regulatory front. I think the U.S., Europe, and China seem to be going in very different directions. So we've had kind of two models of big tech so far. The U.S., which owns most of the world, has been extremely laissez-faire. Tech firms have been very lightly regulated. In fact, one of the core principles that tech firms have lobbied for over the last few years, there was an exemption granted under the Communications Decency Act in 1996. Where tech firms were considered to be sort of the town square. So whatever you did in the town square was not their liability. That's very different from a media firm like the FT, for example, or even a nonprofit that you are responsible to a certain extent for what happens in this office, in our pages at the FT. So the tech firms have lobbied very carefully to keep that light touch regulation. Now you're starting to see that rolling back. There was a law that actually passed just a couple of weeks ago through the Senate that provided a small carve out in CDA 230, this loophole for sex trafficking. So this came up because of the really horrible case of Backpage.com, which was engaging, it's a website that was engaging in child sex trafficking. And there was a push to say, hey, if you are doing sex trafficking on your website, or you are engaging in any way and have knowledge of this and are supporting this in the online ecosystem, then guess what? You are liable. So that passed through. That may open the door to a lot more regulation. So that's what's happening in the US. China has a different system. China has a state-run system, obviously, so there is regulation, but there's also total unlimited data collection. So there are smart cities in China where people are monitored 24/7 in their homes, in their cars. That's important in this conversation because AI, artificial intelligence, the technology of the future that really all these firms and really almost every industry is counting on for growth, is built on two things. It's built on data and it's built on quantum computing. So China is saying we're going to collect as much data as possible. That's going to help us move ahead in this industry. Europe, to come back to your initial question, is saying, wait a minute, we want to find a middle ground here. We are social democrats largely. We care about human rights and privacy. But we also don't want to move behind in tech. So they're trying to find a way, how can we protect citizens' privacy and yet also not lose out in the industries of the future?
There's so much to unpack in what you just said. Let's just start with China.
Yeah.
Vacuuming up all of that data, is the central government doing that as well as, so my understanding it's the central government that's doing that, but it's also Tencent and some of the large Chinese tech companies that know they can benefit from data in the same way that Facebook and Google are benefiting from
absolutely. So China has its bats, right? Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, which is sort of like the FANGs in the US. These firms are doing just as much, if not more. I mean, in some ways, there's more mobile commerce in China. In some ways, the Chinese are more data savvy and more willing to engage in the digital ecosystem. But all of these firms have relationships with the state. And this is an important point actually in the trade debate that you have going on right now, and the Trump administration slapping tariffs on China around tech. The Chinese tech ecosystem is a strategic sector for China, and so any company that wants to work in this sector is going to have dealings with the government, and you can bet that the data is being shared.